Association, or HBA Waltham chapter. And so on behalf of the Waltham chapter and also the HBA New England Region Commercial Affinity Group, I'd like to welcome you to today's program titled In a Fast-Growing Biotech, How Does Information Present as a Risk and an Opportunity? First, I'd like to recognize Rosa O'Brien and Vivian Lee. They are the HBA volunteers who have organized this event, so thank you very much. And also a thank you to Triverus for sponsoring today's event. So first, a few housekeeping items. If you can remain on mute to minimize distractions, that would be great. And you can ask questions, I think either live during the Q&A or feel free to enter your questions into the chat box. So here's the agenda. So we'll just I'll do a quick introduction to the HBA for those who are not familiar. We'll spend about an hour with the panel discussion, followed by Q&A, and then we'll do some networking for a little bit and then wrap up. So we're planning to end at 7:30 Eastern time today. So the HBA was founded in 1977 by 5 women who recognized the need for women to exchange ideas and resources within the healthcare industry. And today we are a global nonprofit dedicated to gender equity, advancing women into positions of influence and decision-making to improve health equity and outcomes. And our slogan is kind of that we're a united force for change. When members come together, it's with a shared purpose. We connecting both men and women across healthcare and life sciences. And we believe that by joining forces in the relentless pursuit of gender parity, we're uniting more than individuals, but strengthening the business of healthcare. And so I invite you to learn more about the HBA. If you're not a member, get involved. We have nearly 12,000 members worldwide. And through virtual events like tonight, you can meet members and non-members from all over the world. So I guess that's one good thing about the pandemic is all these virtual events. I'm getting to meet everyone. We have chapters across North America, Europe, India, Asia Pacific. Within the New England region, we currently have 3 chapters. So I encourage you to get involved, and at the end, I'll have some more slides on that. So thank you again to Triverus for sponsoring tonight's event. It was about a year ago that I met one of the co-founders of Triverus. It was actually at an HBA networking event, Laura Heckman, and I was interested to learn about the work that you do with information and data. But I think what struck me even more was the giving back to the community. And I think tonight is a prime example of giving back to the community, supporting the HBA mission, and educating the community. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Jennings from Triverus, who will also be tonight's moderator.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to start by thanking HBA and specifically Vivian and Rosa for organizing this event. It's been a pleasure working with you both. So I'm Chris Jennings. I'm one of the founders of Triverus Consulting. I've spent my whole career in consulting, about 25 years or so, all focused on helping clients get more value from their data. Most of that time has been spent in life sciences, the real specialization in commercial and in data. I am humbled to introduce the panel tonight. We have great respect for all of these individuals. They have a fantastic combination of business expertise and IT expertise, and that combination really helps support the discussion around this topic today. So I'm going to start with Jackie Fernandes. Jackie is a compliance and privacy professional. and is the founder of Transparency, Inc. Jen Heckman is the Vice President in Product Team Leadership at Exelixis. And Tony Murabito is the Vice President of IT at Wave Life Sciences. Each of them are going to do a little bit more of an introduction to themselves as we get to the first question for them. So let's just jump right in. So to start us off, first question is, how do things change as a biotech organization evolves and moves from being a research organization to preclinical, to clinical, to commercial, as it pertains to data? I'm going to start this off with Tony.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the intro and welcome everyone. My name is Tony Murabito, as Chris mentioned, VP at Wave Life Sciences. Been in the pharmaceutical biotech industry for over 40 years. So I'm a lot older than I look, but spent my first 20 years at various entities of GlaxoSmithKline. And my last position there was global head of R&D IT. I then spent the last 20 years in various small, mid-sized biotechs up and down the East Coast. Most recently, prior to Wave, I was at Human Genome, was their last CIO before we got purchased by GSK. There's that GlaxoSmithKline again in my career. And prior to that, I spent 8 years at Cubis Pharmaceuticals, where we launched an IV antibiotic that was quite successful. And it's interesting, Chris, you asked that question, because as you go through pharmaceutical biotech companies, you do see differences in how data is handled, especially at the preclinical and clinical stages, where you see a lot of silos in play. Groups tend to work within themselves, be it biology, toxicology, screening, med chem. The only information sharing is usually done by throwing it over the wall, or in the cases of output when they're working on publications, but really not a lot of thought at that time into building dossiers, starting to think about regulatory submissions. You tend to start that awareness phase as you enter preclinical and phase 1. Where you're getting involved with patients, you're starting to deal with data that's GLP regulated, GCP regulated, so you need to have more prescribed processes. But you also need to take the organization with you in terms of, you need to let the people know in toxicology why that data is so important to a regulatory submission, so you don't end up 2 weeks before you're planning to get a dossier in place and you're still not sure what that source of truth was. Was it this assay result in this system, or was it this assay result? So it's really important to get a handle on it early years, because in a bad case, you're looking back 5 years ago when most of the people probably left the company. There's nobody who was aware of that study at that time. So it's really important to get on top of these issues as soon as possible, because of the extended life of getting a drug submitted, approved, and then marketed. I'll stop there, Chris.
Yay, thank you, Tony. Jen, Tony just talked a little bit about data sharing and silos. Do you have any perspective on that?
I do. So hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel discussion here tonight. I also have been working in the pharmaceutical industry and drug development for many, many years. So I've got 30 years in industry, spent a good part of that time in big pharma, but over the last 10 years, I've been in small to mid-size biopharma, biotechs, which has been pretty exciting. And I'm also heavily involved in the HBA, so this is really great. I am actually the director of the Mid-Atlantic Mentoring Program, and very involved in getting people into the mentoring organization. So this is great to be able to do something for HBA and also be able to share some of my experiences as I've been in these companies that go through these massive growth cycles. So I guess the first thing I would say is what's really important is to think of that data strategy. So what I've seen in the last few companies that I've been at is a very big emphasis on growth when it comes to people and culture. And that is very important. And that's the hard thing, that everything is important, right? But you have, a growing portfolio of products and interest in expansion, whether that's, to new operating sites or to other locations. And there's a lot of emphasis put on bringing in the people to help support this growth. And you start to see a lot of silos in terms of their development of their part of the organization, because that's what they've been hired to do. So they're building on that. It's equally, if not more important, to make sure there's also somebody focusing on that data strategy for the points that Tony brought up. At some point, you will get there where you're looking for information, you need data, whether it's patient data or operational data. And if you don't have that mechanism in place for how information is shared across there and stored within your organization, then you will be in trouble. So I think that's a lot of what we'll focus on here in the discussion tonight.
Great. Thanks, Jen. And Jackie, how about you from the IT and compliance perspective?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jackie Fernandes, and welcome. Honored to be here tonight to talk to you guys about all the possibilities of what we can do with our data and opportunities. But on the flip side, I work more with risk. So I actually have been in the industry quite a few years, 20 plus now, and I entered because risk was starting to come in through the FDA wanting to look at oversight in IT and what they actually did in the organization. So when the FDA started rolling out their regulations, I came in and tried to make sense of it all to make a cohesive front to the processes that we were executing in IT to ensure that there was consistency and coherence in what we were doing. And I started with my first pharma company. I was there about 15 years before I went off and did some consulting. And I landed at another smaller biotech in rare disease this time. And this next jaunt, I actually jumped into data privacy and became a chief privacy officer for the organization, just as GDPR was rolling out. And that was to say was overwhelming for everybody, as privacy was a thing from the patient standpoint, but now it was really growing a broader perspective as it turns out into actual engagement. And I've stayed there for a few years before I moved on to a VP of IT role at a small biotech company of about 150 people. And that's where we see the real use of data and the need for data come into place. But where it's necessary, as when the company grows and people need more access or want more access to that data, it's important that they get it. So IT controls start to evolve at this point in the organization to ensure that everyone has access to the data that they need and it's the right data that they need. So at a previous company, the way we facilitated that is we actually pulled in data from different resources and created a small data hub and provided the R&D group as the main function access to that data so they could run their tests efficiently and actually get to decision making quite quickly. So controls can actually bring some structure and cohesion to the process and conciseness in decision making.
Nice. Thank you, Jackie. All right. So we're all warmed up now. So each one of you has experienced significant growth at the companies you've been at. And that growth has come with a lot of change. And in that, you've had a lot of successes and triumphs with data. And we'll start on the positive side. This is about opportunities and risks. So we can definitely start on the opportunity side. So can you talk about some real examples of where things went really well, and share some of those triumphs? And Jackie, I think we're going to stick with you starting this one.
Sure. So, data lives essentially everywhere. People are having it in systems. They create their own databases. It could be in SharePoint, and they're different data hubs. So at my previous organization, what we did is we actually looked at the data that we had and streamlined data that many cross-functional groups needed and just put it into one cohesive structure. This enabled them to make decisions quickly, because if the CEO is coming and asking a question, normally it was taking them 3 weeks to get that answer because the data was spread all throughout the organization. But by pulling that information into a database or a data hub that had controlled access and security around it, the teams were able to actually answer that question in a matter of 3 hours instead of 3 weeks. Now that gained amazing efficiencies for the team and for the organization, because they were able to execute quickly, make decisions quickly, and get better performance on their testing.
Great. Tony, I think some of our conversations prior to the session, you talked about some pretty successful triumphs you've had with data throughout your career. Can you give some examples?
Yeah, for me, the most powerful one was when I was at Cubis. So I was hired at Cubis as the head of IT in 2003, and we were about 6 months away from launching antibiotic that was effective against staph, strep infections, highly effective against MRSA. And we wanted to build the sales model complete that would give us end-to-end visibility on our product, where it was going, who was buying it. So we constructed an approach where we basically had a 3PL who we worked with, who did all of our order management, order fulfillment, et cetera. But we set it up on a nightly basis at midnight. That 3PL would run a report for us, which would give us an overview of all the sales we made in the previous day. Now, being an antibiotic, hospitals didn't normally order it until they actually had a patient at use, especially one that cost $150 a vial. So it was expensive compared to the other agents, but we felt we had a promising product, and B, if we could get that data and put it back into the individual sales reps' hands for their territory, we could give them a tool that would help facilitate the pull through of the product. And we started with this endeavor, and it gave us insights into our marketplace. We were selling in areas that typically weren't on our target list, yet the drug was being taken up. And we started to understand some of the areas outside of indications the drug was going for. But for about the first year, we were battling Pfizer, who had a similar antibiotic that was available both oral and IV, although a bit more expensive. They could step their patients from IV into oral. And then, oh, by the way, Pfizer had a major manufacturing issue and literally ran out of drug for 6 months. So we had this great sales model that gave us insights into where Cubis sales were going. And somebody said, well, why don't we just get Pfizer's data and understand their market for the last 6 months? Because you could purchase this data commercially, where ours was fresh within the last day. The Pfizer data was 30 days old, but plugged it into our market, gave us great insight. And then we could send the reps in and say, hey, we know you're using patients on Zyvox, you can't get it, you can replace it with Cubicin. And really that 6 months of downtime for Pfizer helped Cubis get a foothold in the marketplace that turned it into a $1 billion plus drug, and eventually was the sole valuation for Cubis, being sold for almost 11 billion to Merck. But again, the insight that we had and then how to use it further was really eye-opening for me.
That's a fantastic example. All starting giving visibility into that 3PL data to the people that needed it.
Yep.
It's fantastic.
early on, we couldn't get the technology to work. That was probably the biggest difficulty. We were using an Oracle to-go laptop that was supposed to sync. It never did. So we just went to a straight web-based, and then it really took off. So we had some initial technology hurdles that we worked around, but it was like Pavlov's dog after a while. The head of sales wanted to get a ticker tape across the office for sales, etc. If we didn't get that report out by 6:15, we knew we were getting a host of calls, usually the first one from the CEO, Mike Bonney, because we all knew how valuable it was and how that was helping us drive the business. And kudos to those guys. They were at the Biogen. They had previously ran commercial Biogen. So when they went to Cubis, they had this model already in their head. We just had to build it and then apply it.
Fantastic.
It's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Jen, can you share some of your successes?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an interesting story, and so many amazing little nuggets woven in there as well, right? So that we'll probably touch on later. But I'll go back to, I can't tell a success story without starting a little bit with a disaster, right? Because it's about managing a clinical portfolio of work. So in many organizations, as you're growing, I talked a little bit about this growth in silos. So you're growing like a product management organization, a portfolio management organization, and maybe using, as I have in my previous companies and currently, a product and portfolio, program portfolio management tool of sorts. And that's your strategy, that's your planning tool. So when the teams get together and decide what clinical programs we're going to need to do to execute, and bring this a product through to the development life cycle, this information goes into this tool. Then it's kind of handed over down the road, and you've got the tactical operational team that starts managing the actual delivery of those clinical programs, and they're managing their timelines in this tool. So there you have it, right? We've got two sources of truth. And the problem that presented itself here is you've got, senior leadership asking for information. When's the study going to start? When's the first patient going to be in? And one team saying this and another team saying that. And you can just imagine all of the problems that causes if, for least of all, you've lost, no one has faith in any of the dates. You have no confidence in anything, but at worst, you're making some pretty detrimental decisions based on data, and you're not sure which data you should be using. So the solve that we had was integration and identifying the source of the truth and making the two systems actually speak to each other. So of course, we want the people speaking to one another as well. And that was the first pass is, hey, teams need to work more integrated. If the operational team is identifying that the strategic team didn't have the right dates, once they've gotten into the details and understand the complexities and things are changing as they get closer to execution, you want to have that conversation happening, but, it also really, really facilitates better accuracy and better discussions when your systems are integrated and they're speaking to each other, and you can clearly identify which source system holds the true date. And then you create the opportunity for all people to see that in one location. So a visualization layer that actually pulls information from those source systems and gets to the point that everyone is looking at the same place to get the same information at all layers within your organization. So that's what we were able to achieve at my last company. And it was just, an absolutely huge success story to be able to say that, we have clearly identified the source of the truth. We've integrated where we need to, and we've brought visualizations to light that everyone is going and accessing this information in the same place. So there's lots of, trust and little ambiguity.
Great. There's a theme there of getting the information with integrity and quality in the hands of the people, the business people that can actually use it to do their jobs, between yours and Tony's answer there. You guys can imagine what the next question is. So we started on the triumph side, and thank you for sharing those. On the flip side, there's risks with data. And based on your experience, can you share some of those risks and what you've done to avoid them or mitigate them? And actually, similar to what we did before, we're going to start with Jen again. Jen had a particularly interesting perspective the first time we talked about risk as it related to data that it kind of was eye-opening to me of the concept of somebody in Jen's position, what they see as risk.
Right. So, I mean, I already shared where some of our challenge was and the risk that exists. So this probably frames my way of thinking. But when Chris asked this question, I said, the risk is simply not sharing the data, is keeping this information in operational silos. So then we are, making decisions off of inaccurate information. So the risk in my world, when you're looking at this operational data, is really not creating that opportunity and creating that mechanism to be able to ensure that the data is available to everyone who needs it to make those decisions. Then you can get into some of the risks about making that information so broadly available. As we started to navigate to that way of thinking where, nothing needs to be secret. If it's operational data, everyone should actually have this information. It's needed to drive decision-making in multiple areas within the organization. But then you start to expose that you may have some differences in your, data dictionaries. Like people think here, FSI, and maybe some people think that's a first site initiated, and other people think that's your first subject in, and you're, bringing people's perspective from multiple different, as the whole point of this topic is fast growing biotech. So by default, you've brought people in that come from different organizations and have different ways of thinking about some of this data. So I think that's a big risk. It's important to share everything, but it's important to make sure that you create a common language and a common way of thinking, and kind of give some instruction on how to use that data as well when you get to that point.
Great. How about you, Tony? What are your perspectives on some of the risks as you're a growing organization with data?
Well, some of it is just meat and potatoes, for lack of a better word. A lot of risk I've seen is around, say, inventory management or the lack thereof. I literally walked into my first job at a Boston biotech, TKT, in 2001. And within a week, I was in the CEO's office asking me how we ended up losing 125,000 in resin, HPLC resin, which is very expensive, has short half-lives. And I said, I'm still looking for the bathrooms, but let me investigate this, etc. And here we literally had no processes for inventory management. So you would have this expensive substance would come in and get recorded and then go under somebody's desk or in someone's shelf, not a location for inventory management. There was nobody doing decrements when they were using it, how much was left. So it was literally, in that case, setting up a simple inventory management system between a couple departments just to start tracking resin. Then I get to WAVE, and this is 2021, so 20 some odd years later, and we had similar deficiencies in our internal processes. We'd have material go into R&D, and basically we had no tracking. So over the course of a year, we bought $5 million of material, but we had no way of knowing what's left in the inventory. We had to write off over $1 million last year. Suffice to say, our inventory system at WAVE is now humming, but again, it was something we knew we had to address, but we had to first address the informatics layer, etc. But again, for $1 million at WAVE, that's a sizable sum just to be wasting, having to write it off your books. So again, meat and potatoes, but you do inventory management, and this is just in the R&D setting, it can get very costly and usually gets the attention of someone in the C-level.
Great. Jackie, you're the risk is your business, I think. So from your lens, what are some of the risks you've encountered and how you've mitigated them?
Well, I think that some have been brought up here by Jen and Tony, specifically around, system of record. What is your real true data source? Who has access to the data? Poor inventory management. And I think from my perspective and working on a number of cases with legal and compliance is, it has to go a couple of layers down to make sure that we have processes and controls in place. But a lot of what is forgotten about is most companies, in my experience, like to retain and just hold on to everything. And when you're in legal and compliance sometimes, or you're trying to talk through situations of what we have or respond to something that we have to respond to an entity or an audit committee, it's really challenging when we hold on to everything. So just as we should be doing normalized, reviews of who has access to the data and how it's secured, we should also be doing an inventory of our data to see if we still need it and we still need to hold on to it. And that's often, something that's done at a much later stage, when it's absolutely necessary. But if we do it early, it's easy to keep track of, because sometimes too much data is not a good thing to have around.
Yeah.
Now, just adding on that, Jackie, example I know of a company didn't have any retention policies, were around for 12 years, saved everything. And when you're saving every email, every chat, you have no idea of the risk until you get into a legal situation or a discovery situation, and you realize the risk you have at hand, whether you lose a case or can't properly defend a product. Well, I can't tell the company's name. I can't say within 6 months post that litigation effort, they had a 2-year retention for all but necessary documents, be it finance, studies where you have prescribed retention periods. But just managing your email and chat's a bit more judicious and keep you out of trouble. Then when you add a Salesforce to that equation, oh boy, you're looking at enormous risk. And I'm sure Jackie could talk to us all day about the type of risk a sales teams bring to the forefront.
Definitely. We actually, Jen, do you want to add anything to this one?
I was just going to say, Chris, do you want me to address the question that was raised in the chat? Because I think that was.
Yeah, I was just going to pose that. I was going to pose one before the one we saw that Noelle asked 2 fantastic questions. That's the first one. The one you can, I have a separate one, I think. So let's start with that one. So how realistic is it to get different parts of a growing organization to learn how to access and pull relevant, actionable data? So Jen, we'll go to you on that one.
Yeah, and I think that was a follow-up that right after I kind of spoke about, getting everybody kind of pulling information from the same place and using that data. And this is change management. So, I mean, how realistic? It's very realistic and possible, but it is not easy. It takes time. It takes dedicated people to work on change management within your organization. So, I mean, you have to have an organized strategy for kind of rolling this out. If you want people to all utilize it, access it, you have to have kind of individualized the what's in it for me, right? People are not going to go there in the first place if they don't know why they're using it, if it's not meaningful for them. So, you have to kind of give a quick win to people, and then you got the hook and you bring them along for the long game. And organizational support, leadership support, right? You're not going to get success here if, we've developed dashboards and everybody's supposed to be accessing this information in one place, but your top people in the organization still do the send me a PowerPoint deck, or let's walk down the halls and get the information, right? We need to get senior leadership engaged in ingesting their information that way as well. And the more that people are like, well, I went to the dashboard and it didn't seem accurate, then the more you're going to get people to start adjusting their behavior. So it takes time, it takes a strategy to make it work. I think there's lots of great ways that you can do this, though, and you can make it fun for people. Dashboards that I've spoken about, there was this feeling that in my old company that they were just so intuitive, you didn't even need to provide people training, right? Anyone could go in and use this information and access it. And that is true. But we found that we still needed to do things like scavenger hunts, or, hey, you win an Amazon gift card if you can answer these questions, and get them in there to like navigate the tool themselves. It was easy for them to do it, but they needed that incentive to get started. So I think it's just about really taking the time and investing and recognizing you are going through a lot of change in the organization, and now you're introducing even more change. So it's not going to happen without putting some of that effort into it.
Jen, to add on, it's a great example. You must have spent a lot of time and effort and coaching to get people to make that switch. We kind of got frustrated because we had certain people at Wave who wanted to control the messaging, and they do that through PowerPoint slides. Yet we had this unbelievable informatics environment that we built over the last couple of years. You can see updated data across our entire discovery shop. You can see into process development, what we're synthesizing. But no, they wanted to control the message. What we ended up doing was sitting down with the CEO. Hey, Paul, we wanted to show you what we spent $1 million on the last 18. Wow, you got all this data? And again, we ended up hooking the C-level to drag everyone out because the resistance was, unbelievable. They wanted to control the messaging. But you have the data. We'll just populate your slides. We can do that. So again, we kind of took a different tack on that change management. Say, if we could hook Paul, we could hook one or two others, we can drive the organization this way. Now all of our scientific review committees are done. So everybody's dealing with the same data, same currency, but we tried for about 6 months the other way and said, well, let's just go to Paul and show him what we got.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to have the carrot and the stick, right? I mean, you got some of this, like you got to have really important people that are like, I'm using this, you better be using it too. But also this carrot, like, ultimately, we're trying to create this data flow to save people time and to build efficiency and effectiveness within your organization. Show them how that's going to happen really quickly. Like, you don't need to put PowerPoint slides together. Think about all the time that you can save by not doing that, because it's all right here. So you can do other things with that time that you now have. Like, this isn't about, people get nervous that technology is going to take their job away. And that is very important to have that clear messaging that no, it's actually going to give you the time to do the things that you really, we really want you to have time to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say this is where, in my previous roles as rolling out, compliance programs for IT, and then in privacy is where I partner with the businesses and say, okay, why do you need it? Put the carrot and the stick in front of them, right? But create the cohesive map and the guidelines of what no one has time to do, documentation and controls in place of this is how we do it. This is what we're looking at too. So they can see that it's just not a siloed function that's forcing them to do this, but really it's an enterprise-wide initiative that we're trying to drive here. Yeah.
Such an interesting discussion. Data literacy is something our clients often ask us to help improve within the organization. And it's a tough topic to tackle. Your example there, Jen, and Vivian wrote it in the chat about kind of gamifying it, right? You got to go find something, which means you got to get in there and learn it to find it. Was such a cool example of how to help improve organization's ability to understand and interpret and access the information. That was great. Noel asked another really great question that I'm going to throw in here. So we talked about the risks and the opportunities. And she asked, how early in the development of an organization is it wise to merge different data sources together? She said she's heard quite a bit of debate about this. Not exactly sure which data sources Noel's referring to, but any thoughts on that question?
Do you want me to speak my question?
Yeah, that'd be great, Noel. Yeah.
Yeah, just because of the risk that sometimes comes when, well, some data can be shared across different parts of the organization,
They
or
got the engine running.
and
Well,
other times it's
Not the
other
key
times
engine, but the
you're
starter.
still bringing new people in who aren't familiar with stuff. I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is there are risks when you share too much, and there's lost opportunity when you share too little. That's the message I got from the last conversation, which is, isn't it great that you can just go in and see the data? You don't have to have a debate about what's the one truth and where are we and what are the results and what does the data say? And so I've been working with some organizations where they seem to be having some debate, and some of the IT teams seem to be saying, well, we have to keep all these things separate.
Oh yeah,
Maybe
it started right up when I.
that's saying
yesterday.
they have to be separate. So I just wanted to hear your experience about that data merge and resistance to it and opportunities to do it.
Yeah, if I'll jump in here. So, at my last company, we were small. We were 150 people. And we had one large data source and then little external data sources, but not enterprise-wide types of applications. And when it came time for science presentations or board meetings, everyone is working in these decks and they think they're working in the same deck, and they realize, oh, the information didn't sync because everyone's not in the same deck. So as the VP of IT, I didn't necessarily look at what systems they were working in. I looked at what is the data they're trying to access and use, and segmented it off so a cohesive group, or the same group that needed to get to it, could get to it. And to Jen and Tony's point earlier, it takes time and it takes coordination and it takes communication and collaboration with the teams. But my focus was less on the technology and more on the data and what they wanted to use it for. And that enabled us to not only silo off the information so these key groups could access the information that they were accessing all the time, but then we were able to pull information out from the R&D front and then build more information into their data hub from clinical or wherever. So those added groups could also see the added benefit of having all the data in one place. And it kind of, once they learned how easy that was, and again, it's a learning curve, they never wanted to go back to the old way of doing things because it just added so much more efficiency to their workload.
Yeah, I'll build on that a little, Jackie. I think we've talked a lot about technology, and I talked about integrating systems, and maybe that's where you're going a little bit, Noel. But I think spot on, right? Ask what is the data that you need and why do you need it? And that starts driving that decision making. So the company I'm at now, Exelexis, I've been here for a month, 4 weeks, so brand new. But people are already like, we're in this inflection point, we're growing, and everyone's worried about what systems we're going to get and how we're going to move these systems around and how this is going to work. And I keep driving people back to, what do we need? What is the business question that we're asking? What data do we need to see, and who needs to see it? So don't start with which technologies do we have? Do we need to merge? Do we need to manage? It's, what questions do people need to answer? Why do they need the information? How do we need to work with that?
Yeah, I'd say at Wave, just to jump in, we learned the hard way. So we were running towards commercialization in 2019 with an orphan drug, and we started gathering the data. And as I mentioned, we couldn't find source data. We couldn't find our key Western blot assay data. Thank God the drug failed, because if we had to get a submission together, we would have struggled to complete it. But we learned a hard lesson then. And when we look back, there were a lot of lessons learned. Some of it was on the science, which we learned, applied, and actually had some great news today, which is always good in our space. But more importantly, we as a company decided we enter a drug into phase 1. We want to start building the dossier that day. We want to start getting the components in place. Now, there's a lot of data systems that are still outside the company. So we've been deliberate what we bring in and what we leave at our partners. For example, we felt we could really create a competitive advantage around our statistical programming group. They were pretty good, and we decided we're going to hire this group. We're going to build the infrastructure capabilities to be able to do this all internally. We're going to leave some of the clinical work done, still some of our tox work, but we felt that could give us a competitive advantage. One of the benefits of our current study in Huntington's is the FDA agreed to us with this adaptive dosing protocol. First time they did it, we were the first company, but due to our modeling, they felt comfortable to give us some flexibility on the dosing regimens. And again, today was kind of a good hallmark in that, we came out in a good way. We'll next start bringing in some of that tox data next year, but we're being deliberate and methodical to bring that in, all the while building the dossier for our 2 programs now in phase 1. Because again, we want to have those pieces. We want everybody going back. Okay, this is the source material. If you need this tox report, if you need this CMC report, here goes where it is. But again, that had to be a hard lesson that we learned as an organization. And so it was easy to get people to step up at that point, Chris, when they lived a nightmare.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I'm going to take us back to the growth topic. And this growth is related to portfolio expansion. So you're adding a second product, a third product, new indication, new therapeutic area. There are plenty of challenges with that. And can you explain some of those challenges and hurdles as you've been working for companies that have been expanding their portfolios? And Tony, I think we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I would say as IT leaders, we need to be absolutely disciplined. We just had a discussion among a group of CIOs, and some of them are getting ready to launch into commercial builds. And you literally want to build just in time. You don't want to get to that endpoint. You build something and, you don't get the labeling that you needed, or you don't get the indication that you were going for, or that second product, a lot of times, especially if it's in a different therapeutic area, is going to be a real challenge on your infrastructure, et cetera. So you really want to develop it just in time. Make sure you're working in the business. Make sure you don't overbuild, and then no one shows up. I think we have a couple of companies I could use who built beautiful commercial infrastructures and then didn't get approval. And they're sitting there with this $10 million Cadillac, not knowing what to do with it, because it's hard to apply commercial into a research organization. It's just not adaptable, flexible. So yeah, just building just in time. Again, I put stresses on the IT organization because now you have 6 projects to execute in a couple of months, but I think it's better to deliver just in time than to overbuild.
Great. Jackie, I know you've have a few examples where you've been part of organizations that have expanded their portfolio. What's your perspective on that question?
Yeah, so in working with the commercial teams, and they had their different brand teams for each of the products, similar to what everyone's been saying before, everyone wants access to information. And because they're in a siloed work structure, they don't necessarily know that they already have the information that they need, which causes a problem, right? So my perspective is, if we're asking our clients and our patients to be transparent with us and giving us information so we can easily find them and service them, then we need to elevate that transparency with our data inside the commercial organizations and start sharing that information cross teams, cross functions. That way, we're not finding ourselves in a situation of data duplication, or we're going after the same KOL multiple times, and we have a more cohesive communication front with our partners that we want to engage. And from the compliance perspective, as it relates to privacy, that's a necessity because we have to be very specific in the reason why we're engaging an individual, especially in the EU, and we can't just lump 50 reasons on a page to say, hey, do you mind if I get consent to talk to you about what it is we do? Because they will say no, and they have that right to say no. And that's an opportunity lost for us. So it's critical for us to, as we build and grow, is to do things just in time, but also elevate the transparency and the data and its use as you grow. So teams aren't being inefficient in trying to get their work done.
Yeah. I saw you shaking your head there quite a bit, Jen. Any perspective on this one?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think it really probably resonates with a lot of people that, people know information in one part of the organization, and it could be very valuable to people in another part of the organization. So how do we make sure that that's known to all? Again, when a company is growing pretty rapidly, you get new people that come in and they might have had a really good experience with some external data at another company. So they want to engage this vendor to bring this external information in, and they go through all this work and get this information only to find out down the road, oh, we already had this. It was sitting in the commercial organization, right?
Yeah.
So, how to set up the structure within your organization. I was thrilled coming into Exelexis to find out that our digital transformation group actually is a bit of a gatekeeper for all of this, and they've got a great inventory of all of the external vendors that are a data source for us. And so if you're going to try to bring something in, you have to kind of go through that and find out what we might already have. So if your company doesn't have something like that, that's a really important layer to add. And some people see that as bureaucracy. We want to come in and be nimble and just do whatever, but it actually is builds the efficiency so that you don't duplicate effort.
Yeah. Reminds me of a story early in my career. One of my first projects in commercial was for a large pharma who had a big portfolio expansion. And we had to find and search out where they had that duplication. And they were buying $6 million worth of duplicated data.
Yeah.
Exact same data set from the exact same company, which is a whole nother question.
Yeah, I've had that experience too.
This next one, whoever wants to answer this, there are questions from the audience here. So the question is this: what does the training support look like for users during implementation and for future users? Some of these systems could have massive updates that could alter the user experience. Could we chat high level about strategies for change management? It's not one and done.
I mean, that's what I was touching on before, right, Chris? So, I mean, change management is never one and done. It's actually worthwhile having an entire dedicated group, or at least a person who is constantly looking at when things are updating and managing the change. But, I think simplify it, right? You need to make it functional so people immediately can understand something that they're going to be able to get a benefit out of it. But what's in it for me, as I said before, frequent. So it's not one and done, it's continual. You have to, give people, repeat the information, share something new, but do it frequently and fun, right? Don't make it boring training that people need to, that they're just going to ignore and click through. Do something that engages them.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts if I can. One is it depends on the situation, Chris.
Yep.
We were redoing our discovery platform, and we had a system that was somebody's PhD project that turned into our discovery platform, Fugu. Everyone loved it. Everyone in IT and data science hated it. You had no ability to share information. You had no access control. Everybody in the company got access to everything. And we were building a new, more robust discovery platform, but we had to do a concerted effort. We hired a change management agent for 6 months to work through the project. We had a big contest in the company. We name everything in nautical terms. So our old system was Fugu. We put it out to the whole company, put a $500 reward. We wanted to up it a little bit, and got 20 beautiful nominations with logos. And then we turned it over to ET, the executive committee, and said, okay, you guys pick the final 3. And now we're going to introduce this to the organization, and they'll vote again and pick the name. And we did it at a town hall. The CEO announced it and announced the winner and such. But again, that was part of our change management effort. The other thing that really helped us on that project is a business adoption team. So we have a group of 8 people who sit across multiple departments who are in charge of training their teams, of learning the new systems. We're in this agile Scrum approach where every 2 weeks we're rolling out new development, new capabilities. So you need that group constantly refreshed and changed and working on the next set of enhancements. So that tends to work well with us. Me and my organization, I always early on adding a training and communication role, fill time, which we have at Wave, because it's important. We're a customer-centric organization. How can you be customer-centric if you're not providing support, training, break fix, et cetera? So to me, that's another piece you need to bring to the table in order to help the organization be successful. Because yeah, once a quarter, we're throwing big changes into our ERP system. That's every quarter that's happening. So you need to be good at that change management if you're going to help your organization grow.
Agreed. And I think from my perspective, I would, infuse it cross-functionally. So get key representatives from each of the business functions that you meet with regularly at a smaller basis, maybe monthly, to say these are the changes that might be impacting your area coming up. And then having a cross-functional, steering committee quarterly. So everyone's aware of what's going on and when, and if executive or the ET team had questions on why is this happening, we had those answers. And the teams that I've been working with, on a monthly basis, also had the supporting evidence to kind of get them in the mix of why we need to make this change and why it's so important. So cross-functional communication and collaboration is key.
Great. So we've had some great questions from the group here. We've talked about risks. We've talked about successes. Let's dig a little deeper into some specific examples of how to balance. We've talked a lot about data sharing, information transparency, how we balance that with privacy and security. It's not an easy task to accomplish transparency while getting the privacy and security in place that you need to meet the regulations. So I think we'll start this one with Jen.
Oh, I think we need to start this one with Jackie, right?
Let's start it with Jackie. Yeah, we'll tee up Jackie. Let's go, Jackie.
Because I need to learn from Jackie about all this privacy and transparency. Yes.
So, we're trying to build in an infrastructure across an enterprise, and that requires everyone's cooperation. And in order to do that, they need to see us as a partner, right? And most people don't want to see me coming to them because they think they're in trouble. And that's not a good feeling to have. But I actually go in there and show them that I am their collaborative partner, and I am there to take their mind off of any trouble that they might think they might get in due to violating anything, right? So I'm in there to help them build a good infrastructure, a controls infrastructure at a very high level, so they know that they can do their job every single time, and also know they're meeting the compliance regulations and obligations that are being asked of them. Make it easy, streamline everything for them so they're not stopping in the middle of their workflow to think, oh, do I need to go check with compliance on this? but make it part of their culture, essentially. Privacy and security is everyone's responsibility.
Absolutely. Tony, we had a little chat about this one in the past. Do you have any examples to build on that?
Yeah, my wife hates when I say this, basically with that caveat, but I try to operate IT with an open kimono and basically let the organization see everything you're working on. Here's our current project list. Here goes the next set of projects that are rolling up after. Here's our strategies. Here's our security. I try to create a cadence with the organization for me around security. So if things are a bit bad, hey, everybody, we really need you to update your Google Chrome browser tonight because there's this. You try to create that cadence with the organization to make them aware of security, to make them aware of risk, but you have to do it in a visible fashion. I tell everyone, hey, we lost $300,000 3 years ago. We got twice fished out of it. That's not going to happen again. And that's why we do an intensive phishing test. That's why we have a fish alert button on your email, etc. But again, you have to make them aware why you're doing it. We had to lock down USB devices a year ago and only open them up for business reasons. Why? Somebody tried to take the whole company with them when they were leaving, and we can't have that. And again, tell them the truth for the most part. Let them know what you're dealing with, and they tend to be much more understanding. But you have to do it with that sense of visibility that you're not hiding anything, etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. And yeah, I wanted to hear them first because I sit on the business side, but I think, I like what you said, Jackie. It's like, we've got to build that trust, right? So it shouldn't be when you see you coming that we're like, oh no, I'm in trouble. It should be that we're including the compliance and the privacy right out of the gates in the beginning and building that cross-functional collaboration and trust for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've been weaving in the questions from everyone in the audience along the way here. So we've eaten into our Q&A period a little bit. Is there any other questions from people in the audience? I think you can come off mute and ask them audibly if anyone has any else. Otherwise, we'll probably move into our networking component of the show. All right.
Not going to ask us what keeps us up at night?
Yeah, let's do what keeps you up at night there, Tony.
Caffeine.
All right. Jennifer, do you want to share the slide about the breakouts?
Sure. I think we're just going to break out into some breakout rooms for a little bit of networking and maybe talking about some of the content. I think one of the panelists will be in each breakout room, so we'll get a chance to meet each other. And then we'll regroup in about 15 minutes.
Great. So I think what HBA was asking us to do is introduce ourselves, talk about what resonated with us, share some experiences, and then exchange some contact information. So look forward to seeing you guys in the breakout.